Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. It's time for more dungeon rankings. We've already made it back to Cataclysm, which is a period I don't have a ton of experience with. I played pretty intermittently and casually for this expansion, and though I have played all 3 of the dungeons that have been updated for Mythic Plus, only Grim Patrol was within a season that I took very seriously, so the bulk of my judgments here come from time walking, I believe. As such, mechanics are going to play even less of a role in my decisions, with environments and general coolness taking precedent. And we're back up to 14 dungeons again, so let's not dilly-dally. In 14th place, we have Hour of Twilight. So funny story about this dungeon. I missed a lot of Cataclysm, so I only did most of its dungeons later when I was catching up on quests, but I never actually received a quest sending me into Hour of Twilight, so I just didn't do it at the time. And for whatever reason, I never decided to fix that. Eventually, it became a thing. Like, this is the one dungeon I haven't experienced yet. I'm gonna save that first playthrough for someday in the future. And then I started making these videos, and it's kind of hard to review a dungeon you've never ran. So finally, like 14 years later, I ran it. And, I knew the basic idea of the dungeon and wasn't expecting much, but man, I really was not missing out. You start out following Thrall around and fighting off scripted trash like we're escaping from Durnhold or something. And all of his audio is of a weirdly poor quality, and we're being taunted by this Ascendant with a cool icy filter, but which still sounds of poor quality. We fight this Arcurian guy, and it's pretty much dodge stuff, break Thrall out of ice, and dodge stuff. Oh, and one thing to interrupt. Woo. You follow Thrall around some more, do some more scripted trash, and fight Asira Dawnslayer. Basically, just have the tank or someone else in the path of any of the casters that get debuffed, move her out of the smoke bombs, and at 30% hit her with 2 really big spells to break her barrier. That's a really weird mechanic, at least nowadays. I know Thrall gives you a buff to make it easier over time, but is this fight just monumentally easier if you have someone with a big, slow ability, and awful if you don't have anyone with one of those? Then, you guessed it, more following Thrall around, this time underneath Wyrmrest Temple, fighting more scripted trash. Look, scripted trash and even escorts can be fine, but you don't make that the entire dungeon's trash. Anyway, you then fight Archbishop Benedictus, who's basically just spreading out, moving out of stuff, and getting in Thrall's water bubble when he puts it up. And halfway through, the boss switches to Shadow, but does all of the exact same stuff. This is seriously one of the laziest dungeons I've ever seen created. It's just running around Dragonblight, one of the least visually engaging zones in the game. Hope the white doesn't hurt your eyes. Okay, but at least they added those old god mods, right? Well, those are also in the Dragon Soul raid, so which one is the guilty party here? And yeah, it's just not fun escorting Thrall literally the whole time. I don't know if it's the worst dungeon in the game, but almost definitely in the top 5 worst dungeons. The only interesting thing about this dungeon is Benedictus's turn. And that's only interesting because it reminds me of the trivia that for 33 days in vanilla, from patch 141 to 1.5, he was the faction leader for humans. As per the patch notes, Archbishop Benedictus staged a temporary coup and has taken the title of NPC leader of Stormwind City from High Lord Bolvar. Hordes seeking to take out the leader of Stormwind should focus their efforts on Archbishop Benedictus for the duration. These changes will remain until the next content patch, when High Lord Bolvar reclaims his rightful throne. This was not given any sort of announcement or story whatsoever, really has to be considered non-canonical, and feels like a temporary workaround to something that might have been broken, but we'll probably never know. The point I'm trying to make is that this dungeon is garbage. Next up, in 13th place, we have End Time. This place has a really cool centerpiece with Deathwing's corpse mounted on Wyrmrest Temple, and that's about the only good thing about it. I exaggerate, of course, but it really is a pretty shoddy experience. First of all, it's just using the dragon shrines around Dragonblight. Making things darker and swapping out some textures and doodads doesn't magically make it less lazy. Don't worry though, you won't have to visit all 5 of them, just 3, with the first 2 being randomly chosen from a pool of 4. Yeah, 2/3 of the dungeon is determined randomly. That's the kind of thing that's maybe a neat gimmick the first time or while leveling, but really annoying in any sort of speedy or challenging content. Got the slow or hard shrines? Well, sucks to be you. Unsurprisingly, the Alliance bosses are the more annoying ones. Echo of Jaina requires you to sneak or murder your way around the Azure Dragon Shrine, collecting fragments, and Echo of Tyrande requires you to pull mobs to the rays of moonlight around the Emerald Dragon Shrine to do any damage to them. By comparison, Echo of Bane at the Obsidian Dragon Shrine and Echo of Sylvanas at the Ruby Dragon Shrine pretty much just require you to pull trash until you get to them. The bosses themselves aren't too bad. Jaina is pretty much just dodging Frostblades and soaking Flare Cores. Tyrande is pretty much dodging Moonblades, how original, and dodging the orbiting orbs. Bane is more of a gear check, with you needing to minimize the time in the magma when knocked back, or when he destroys a platform, and to kill him before you run out of platforms. Sylvanas just requires you to spread, move out of stuff, and to focus one ghoul to kill and create an opening in a wall. I always seem to like that mechanic when it shows up. And then we get to the end, the Bronze Dragon Shrine. The trash here isn't too bad, though you'll probably want to kill all of it for space. He's got the typical Dragon Breath and Tail Swipe, as well as big no-no zones that get dropped on players. The main shtick of this fight is that you're buffed up like crazy, with Nosdormu buffing your movement and attack speed by 40%, and with you able to use the Hourglass of Time to reset cooldowns and debuffs up to 5 times, which means very high uptime on DPS cooldowns and defensives. Honestly, because I've only really experienced it in time walking, 5 charges is way too many, and it's almost annoying trying to use them all. Obviously, they're more necessary with proper tuning. It is a cool concept for a fight, even if it favors cooldown-oriented specs far more than steady damage specs. But ultimately, this just felt like a very underwhelming way to wrap up the Infinite Dragonflight plotline. A single, lazy dungeon with no actual build-up within Cataclysm itself. We would eventually revisit them in Dragonflight because timey-wimey stuff, and though we don't fight Murozond again, we did get a bit more emotional resolution, though I wasn't wholly satisfied with that either. All in all, though it's not a horrible place to run mechanically, it just feels like a lazy and poorly designed place housing a very significant enemy, and that's pretty dang lame. In 12th place we have Zul'Gurub. Players were astonished when the Cataclysm beta hit, and ZG just wasn't a raid you could do anymore. There was speculation, of course, but it still seems strange to just remove it. Sure enough, however, in patch 4.1, it was brought back as a 5-man dungeon, though the original rare tiger and raptor mounts were gone, only to return years later on the black market auction house. Regrettably, I never experienced this place while it was current in either iteration. I didn't really raid in vanilla, and I wasn't very active in Cata, but what is readily apparent to me is that they absolutely gutted this place to make it into a 5-man. Some of these are permissible, as the boss list was probably a little bloated. Gazranka was just a Hydra you fished up in one corner for Turtle Morph, and the Edge of Madness isn't that big of a deal. Except they did keep it in as the Cache of Madness, which you can trigger with Archaeology. Okay, kind of weird. And yet they still removed the Tiger, Spider, and Bat Priests. How do you remove over half of the lowest High Priests? Heck, 2 of those bosses don't even have their areas accessible anymore, except in the overworld. Hakar is still somewhat present, even though it's him being subjugated by Jindo, who has been promoted by Blizzard, which just isn't as cool as just fighting Hakar himself. I do think using Zanzil from the Stranglethorn questing experience to fill the spot Jindo vacated was a pretty good idea though. I can't comment too heavily on the fights, they mostly seem quite alright, and I do appreciate that Mandokir has a level up mechanic with you expected to have a few deaths that you recuperate from with the ghosts. The environment is vibrant, and I love the bridges, though it's perhaps a bit cluttered for my taste. I think the traps they added at several points were actually good additions. They add a little bit of zest to the place without going into gimmick territory. Ultimately, I just don't think the place translated to a dungeon very well, not when you have to cut out so much. Perhaps 2 dungeons would have been workable. So ultimately, because I don't have much nostalgia for the place and yet still feel robbed by the remake, I can't really place it any higher in the rankings. In 11th place, we have the Dead Mines. Dead Mines was one of 2 vanilla dungeons revamped and brought back for 4.0, the first time this had really happened, and unfortunately it seems to suffer for that. A lot of iconic bosses were cut, and silly gimmicks were added to make sure it felt like the cooler, better Dead Mines, but after you run it once or twice, you just wind up missing aspects of the old one. Helix and his oaf aren't as cool as Sneed and his Shredder. Mr. Smite was way too iconic to retire, and losing Edwin Van Cleef was a darn shame. How do you cut, "Ha, you landlubbers are tougher than I thought, I'll have to improvise," and "the Brotherhood shall prevail"? They all sort of fell victim to the insistence that updated dungeons move forward in time. Fortunately, M+ has basically done away with that mentality, and we all accept we're just doing a dungeon from the past. Probably the most forgivable swap was Gilned for the Faux Reaper 5000, which is both more interesting and more tied to its Westfall setting. And Vanessa Van Cleef does at least have some proper build-up if you did the Cata Westfall quests. It could absolutely be worse, but it could also be better. Like, we probably didn't need the cannons and the pilotable harvesters. I don't remember any of the bosses being overly difficult, but again, I never really ran the place on heroic at the proper level. Ripsnarl was admittedly pretty cool with the fog effect. Cookie probably shouldn't even be considered a boss considering what a joke the fight is. Probably the worst part of the remake is Vanessa's stupid neurotoxin sequence that was maybe fun one time. Vanessa's actual fight is far better though, and I think swinging on the ropes at 50% is way cooler than the skywriting equivalent on the first boss of Dawnbreaker. Environmentally, the place is obviously a legend. Stumbling into these expansive mines through an innocent looking barn is really cool, and you get to see all sorts of parts of the Defias's operation, culminating in the ironclad cove and the massive dreadnought ship. What's even cooler is that the dungeon has a separate exit, something you rarely ever see, and the fact that the massive gate that the ship would exit through is actually out there in the overworld in the very northern section of Northern Stranglethorn. Awesome integration into the overworld. So, this fan favorite dungeon is very exciting and very nostalgic, but it really does suffer for trying to change too much and be too bombastic in its revamp. Coming up in 10th place, we have Lost City of the Tol'vir. This is a dungeon that I have very little reason not to like, but ultimately am still not a huge fan of. I suppose it's trying to invoke the feeling of an ancient Egyptian marketplace, but it doesn't really land for me. I think a big part of the problem is that the Tol'vir as a people just don't really land for me. Maybe I'm just prejudiced against centaur-shaped races? The place is probably also a bit too open feeling for my taste as well, to the point that it starts to feel not quite like a dungeon. Yet despite being so open, there are still these narrow bridge tunnels that you're never able to fit through while mounted, so they ultimately just serve to annoy you. To the place's credit though, it does afford you a fair degree of freedom in routing, with the ability to go left or right at the start and heading to the third boss, as well as plenty of optional pulls in the Trapper's Enclave. I think where the place really shines are its bosses. The first, General Hussam, is quite memorable for his intense voice lines. "Invaders, you shall go no further. Turn back before it is too late." As well as his plethora of bombs and his charge/hurl mechanic. Lockjaw and Og are probably the weakest bosses here, with most of the fight mechanics involving kiting them around them or the ads. They always kind of confuse me too, because Og only takes over the fight in heroic. Plus afterwards you would have to backtrack. Barim is fine enough, even if it boils down to moving away from the pillars of flame and killing ads. The last boss, Siamat, is probably the most entertaining. He has the best fight arena on the top floor of a building he's blown the roof off of that overlooks the rest of the dungeon. Yes, a large portion of the fight is simply killing his servants until he becomes vulnerable, but there are enough ground effects to keep it interesting, and his Wailing Winds, which throws all players around, is surprisingly fun. It manages to disrupt everybody, but you can still manage to be somewhat productive if you have instance or mobile casting. So certainly not a bad dungeon. It just doesn't hold a candle to the better ones higher up on this list, to me. Next up in 9th place, we have the Halls of Origination. This dungeon feels like it was originally designed to be a raid. Not just any raid, but a little Ulduar of sorts. I mean, it's literally located in the most important building in Uldum, so that makes sense. But it really is quite the large environment and manages to fit 7 bosses in. I mean, if we're ignoring literal mega dungeons and anything from vanilla, then that makes it the most boss-heavy dungeon in the game, which, you know, makes it hard to evaluate objectively. And on top of all of that, the last 4 bosses, each of which are based on a member of the Egyptian pantheon, feel like very overt parallels to the Keepers of Ulduar, except instead of having fairly large sections to themselves, they all just share recolored alcoves surrounding a central elevator. And it's so weird. Like, we should have learned about these guys, right? But we know basically nothing about them, other than that there are statues of them all over Uldum. Were we gonna learn more before they reworked the zone to be a massive Indiana Jones parody? Anyway, the dungeon is a marvel to look at if you keep your eyes peeled. Sleek Titan machinery all over the place. The Vault of Lights has those really cool moving tile floors. The pyramid behind Earthrager Ptah looks super advanced. Actually, is that the re-origination device? How come it's not visible in the overworld? I thought the Halls of Origination themselves had the re-origination device, and they were just covered in sand and stuff. Okay, this is a bit confusing. Oh, right, the encounters. Well, not a whole lot to say. Anhur is just dropping down, hitting the levers, and racing back up, which can take a while if you don't have alter time. Hard to really remember what the major mechanics of the other bosses are, even after running it again. I do like that Isoset gives you the choice of which of her 3 abilities to empower twice during the encounter. Honestly, I think Anprahet was made easy as a reward for having to clear his whole room, and the final 4 are probably a bit easy just because you fight them so close to each other. Seriously, this place could easily have 2 wings to it, except for the fact that there is so little trash for the last 4 constructs. I don't know, I do really like this place, but something feels off about its implementation. It's just too big for what it is, in one way or another. There should be less of it, or more of it. Also, there's that extra 3rd floor where Bran can access the re-origination device after beating all of the bosses. Also, if you have the yellow monocle and go past the elevator on the 1st floor, you can actually take a passage to go under it and play that constellation minigame. Or, you know, send the elevator up and then jump into the hole it leaves. Seriously, there's so much in here. Why is the dungeon the way it is? It's stressing me out. Rounding off the bottom half of this list, in 8th place, we have Blackrock Caverns. This is a dungeon that I always felt went underappreciated from the pool of Cataclysm originals. And then I ran it to jog my memory for this video, and I think I was overappreciating it. I do tend to have an affinity for earthy, warm-feeling dungeons. Just look at me putting Blood Maul Slag Mines as the winner of the WoD dungeons, so that definitely helps this place out. But the Twilight's Hammer, despite being old god cultists, don't really do it for me very much. Their aesthetic could be better, and while I like that this place feels like it could be a deeper extension of Blackrock Spire and Blackwing Lair, the metal elements also take away from the coziness of it. Except the bridges. I always love me some bridges, especially when I can look down at the further bridge or up at a former bridge, like you can do here. Heck, when Raz jumps onto a random platform during his first rampage, you can actually go to that tunnel later and see all of the dead mobs. I appreciate how real the space feels here. Romog is a simple but fun boss. Kill the chains and get out of there before you're smashed to pieces. Korla also has a simple but fun mechanic in needing to soak the beams to keep the ads from evolving, but not too much or you risk being transformed yourself. And I love the visual of her draining the corpse of another Drake. Karsh is also simple but feels like a middle finger to healers. It's easy to say just dip him in the fire once every 18 seconds to keep his armor soft, but the longer he's in there, the larger his damage taken debuff gets. So for the sake of speed, you want to keep him in as long as you can. But that's more immediate healing and more damage for the 18 seconds after he's out as well. So you really want to blow everything right away to bring him down as far as you can, and to survive that, while also knowing when you just have to stop. Beauty is basically just dropping puddles where it's safe and not getting knocked into a bad spot. I do appreciate that killing Runty will make her go completely berserk. Ascendant Lord Obsidius is a bit underwhelming, with his only real gimmick being switching places with his clones. All in all, this is a humble dungeon, which is understandable given that it's the Hellfire Ramparts or Utgard Keep or Temple of the Jade Serpent of this expansion. It doesn't do anything amazing, but it's a fun jaunt and doesn't do anything wrong either. In 7th place, we have Shadowfang Keep. This was the other dungeon updated with 4.0 alongside Deadmines, and I'd say it survived the transition significantly better off, but not perfectly. Losing Aragal as the memorable last boss was a shame, but Godfrey at least picks up the mantle fairly well. I mean, he betrayed everyone, Worgen and Forsaken alike, even managing to kill Sylvanas and thus cost her 3 of her Valkyr. Unfortunately, though Godfrey himself is cool, he comes as part of a trio of bosses that share the same aesthetic and thus wind up making the dungeon feel much more stale. In fact, my major criticism of the Cata revamp is that they took Shadowfang Keep, the dungeon with a bunch of Worgen to kill, and took out all of the Worgen. Instead, all we have are ghosts and undead. Well, that's not 100% accurate. Alliance players accompany Ivar Bloodfang and his pack, and the second boss, Baron Silverlane, will summon ghosts of the former Worgen bosses. But it's just not the same, and I cannot fathom how they thought not keeping even one around was a good idea. Ashbury is an okay boss, bringing you down to 1 HP, then healing everybody, himself included, so you need to interrupt him anyway, but it's not overly hard to deal with. Commander Springvale, the third boss, is basically an ad management fight. Walden is mostly just jumping during the green vials. Godfrey has some of the more visually interesting things going on with his gun blades and his pistol barrage, but isn't overly difficult. The environment of the dungeon itself is great, and I love that it exists in the overworld, albeit slightly shrunk down. I'm pretty sure the final tower that houses the last two bosses has to use some visual trickery though, as the inside is way bigger than the outside. And yeah, it's just a well-designed, spooky keep. It keeps winding around on itself, which is a detail that I love. I'm ashamed how long it took me as a noob to realize that the wall walk after Springvale overlooked the initial courtyard. I'm also a big fan of the optional path to the right of the courtyard, even though there's no reason to ever take it over the dining hall path. Maybe if they moved the second boss. I have a fair degree of nostalgia for the place, as I'm sure many players do, and I'm probably rating this low fidelity conglomeration of walls and rooms higher than I ought to. But to be fair, the sheer lack of organ to kill is making me rate it lower than I ought to, so it all balances out. In 6th, we have the Stone Core. This is a pretty fun dungeon in all honesty, much more than you would expect a glorified cave to actually be. My main complaint is simply how it relates to the overworld. The entrance is partway up the Temple of Earth, but the actual dungeon environment is nowhere to be found, and it clearly would not fit into this earthy pillar. Presumably, we just take some tunnel further underground, but then why would the entrance be above the questing hub? Do we actually go up? It's clearly not something that was given a ton of thought. But the actual dungeon is completely fine. We start out with a bunch of trash packs that feature Millhouse Manastorm from his Twilight Cultist phase, before he ultimately gets murked by the gyre worm Corobus, who is a fairly straightforward fight. Kill the ads, move out of the crystals, and dodge his burrow charges before they obliterate you. From there, we go through a particularly cavey part of the cave, which includes the Crystal Giants. These guys have one of the simplest but still enjoyable mechanics to them. Just jump when their cast finishes if you don't want to take a ton of damage. Hey, not everybody remembers to do it. You then get to the Overlook and simply run to Slabhide while dodging crashing stalactites. These feature in the fight itself as something you must first dodge and then use for cover during his Crystal Storm. Simple enough. We then proceed to one of the toughest stretches out there, the Chamber of Fanatics, which features a lot of trash packs, many of which have casters that you'll need to interrupt just to get into a position that's safe to fight them in. There are also patrols, as well as scouts that need to be nuked down, lest they summon reinforcements against you. It's a delicate operation that often involves accidentally biting off more than you intended, and it'll probably cause a lot of frustration to players when we eventually get it as M+. Osrook to this day can absolutely wreck groups that mishandle him. Casters need to purge or be wary of his spell reflect shield, and physical DPS need to straight up not touch him during his spike shield. On top of that, there is his close range shatter that you simply cannot eat. Don't even try it. It's not gonna work. And on Heroic, this is paired with his Paralyze ability. Truly a juggernaut deserving of being remembered by his catchphrase, "Break yourselves upon my body. Feel the strength of the earth." The last stretch of trash feels like a victory lap after this, being primarily AoE pulls before we arrive at High Priestess Azil at the site where Deathwing's Elementium plates were attached to him. It's an easy enough but still enjoyable fight. Dodge the meteors and try to position the gravity wells in locations that will cause the ads to run through them. As long as it's implemented well, killing enemies with their own abilities is great fun, so we close the place off on quite the high note. A very traditional dungeon in all of the right ways. And in 5th place, we have Grim Batol. I always kind of enjoyed this one, so it being lamented by so many people in M+, kind of surprised me. It's just the right length, and though linear, is windy enough to not get boring. It being a dark Iron Forge is probably more appealing to me as a Horde player who never got his fill of the original. The bombing run is fun without being overbearing, and more fun when the scaling doesn't let you completely kill everything. You can sort of choose between weakening everything or completely killing some packs. The former is usually safer, so you don't waste shots, and more fun in my opinion. I did prefer when they let you sweep the 3rd section as well, and always enjoyed sneaking shots into the hall to the last boss, but I can see why they shortened it. None of the trash here is overly harsh. Almost everything has a reasonable way to counter or avoid it. Umbrus was easy, kill the Trog, and is still easy, move to the safe quarter and drop puddles on the edge. Throngis literally just becomes about space management, but is pretty lenient about it. It's fun to sneak around him in the middle of the room when he patrols. Draga is easy, just avoid tornadoes, kill ads before they hit people, and don't get knocked off. There seemed to be some strategy to cheese the ads by positioning the boss in an alcove, but it always seemed to blow up on one of the melee, wipe the group, and brick the key, so I much preferred just doing it normally. Erudax used to be easier, but still isn't bad once you learn how to quickly locate the safe-ish part of the room. Very fun dungeon. Also, fun fact, you may have noticed the gaping chasm at the start of the dungeon and behind the third boss still burning a vibrant orange for some reason. While I always assumed this was just due to natural activity, it was originally conceived as the result of Deathwing cutting through the mountain as part of his emergence before being cut, but the visuals still remained in the dungeon, which clearly works as I never really questioned it. It is interesting though. Splashing into 4th place, we have Throne of the Tides. So I did do this on its M+ variant, but was very casual during its season, so I sadly cannot comment much on those changes. But at any rate, this is what I would consider a very solid dungeon that still winds up getting carried a bit by its phenomenal aesthetics. For real though, the entire place is gorgeous, and it's mind-boggling that they never wound up reusing the assets anywhere else. I suppose the Abyssal Maw raid would have, had it ever been released, but alas. The initial haul is quite fun as you've got Naga forces swimming in through the water walls to the sides. Nothing terribly bad here, just make sure the Oracle's heals are interrupted. There are some big guys before the elevator, and what an elevator ride it is. Riding atop a giant jellyfish is really dang cool. Admittedly, this is the kind of thing that I would appreciate much more in a raid where trash is a more lax experience. In a dungeon, it can be a bit frustrating waiting for it. We've then got the Gauntlet hallway, which was fine, if not my favorite part, and Ulthok's room with all of its normal packs and its roaming Murloc packs. And finally, after all that, we get to Lady Nazjar, the Naga Sea Witch that's been assailing us through all of the Vashir questing. This is absolutely a dungeon that front loads its trash before you even get to the first boss. And I don't entirely mind that in this case. Nazjar's fight is fun enough, essentially boiling down to avoiding geysers and, during her intermission, the vortexes while killing off the ads and interrupting the casters. Immediately after, we backtrack to the room we were just in to face off against Ulthok. This mostly boils down to a throughput and space management fight. Nothing too crazy. We then port back to the first floor and make our way to Mindbender Gershaw, a fight that unfortunately tends to get skipped. We free Arunak, avoiding ground effects, making sure not to attack during Gershaw's shield, and breaking our friends out of mind control. And lastly, we have another gauntlet hallway leading to Ozumat, and this one is for sure more annoying than the previous one. I'm not a huge fan of gauntlets in general, but once we get to Neptulon, we're able to defend him from a bunch of ad waves, and then kill 3 bigger ads. What fun. To be fair, the last phase is pretty epic, with Neptulon making us huge to deal with the Vile Kraken. It's really just a nuke phase, but there's nothing wrong with that. And then Neptulon gets captured anyway. Good thing he escapes on his own sometime during the next 3 expansions. Off screen. Yeah, not the best resolution. While this dungeon has some more annoying bits to it compared to those immediately behind it on this list, they aren't such big detriments that the majesty of the Realm of Water isn't able to keep it afloat above them. Taking the bronze, we have Vortex Pinnacle. Basically everything I said about Throne of the Tides applies to this place as well. That I did do it as M+, but very minimally. And that it's overall a very solid dungeon, but would probably be a few ranks lower if not for how breathtakingly gorgeous it is. We're up in the clouds, for crying out loud. I mean, technically we're in Skywall, but we're still in the clouds. Thankfully, the actual architecture we traverse is lovely as well. Even the bridges are great. There's nothing too terrible leading up to the first boss, though those lurking tempests that you just have to look at to deactivate always felt stupid to me. Grand Vizier Urtan has a nice flow to her fight, with you dancing in and out between the cyclones. And here, the lurkers actually add a nice, small layer of depth to a fight that already emphasized positioning. The trash to the second boss is slightly more annoying. The big pulls have those hurricane clouds that aren't the most visually clear, but which you need to get out of. I don't mind the big drakes that need to be pulled away from the healing wells, you know, provided that they are in fact pulled away from the healing wells. The little orbs you need to hit just a bit are odd. Altyrus, the second boss, is mostly fun. Just avoid his frontal breath and the twisters and make sure to position yourselves upwind of him. Really, the only difficulty comes from the fact that he will cast his breath on random targets, meaning that you may very suddenly need to book it, and if you're too reckless in doing so, you'll clip a twister and it's just a cascade of failure at that point. But be pre-positioned to make a quick and easy adjustment and keep a level head and you'll be good. The last stretch of trash is mostly enjoyable. Just move them out of the nullification zones, use the zones to your own advantage, and kick the healers. The 2 spots with the star ads are kind of annoying for everyone that isn't a boomkin, but nothing too major. Assad is another fight with a satisfying flow to it. Kill the ads, keep an eye on the boss's cast bar to make sure you jump, and not suffer the static cling, and get to the grounding field during the storm. Nothing overly difficult. If I had one real complaint about the dungeon, it'd probably be that each third of the dungeon is separated by a great distance that you traverse using the tornadoes that fling you around. It does make the experience a bit disjointed. Otherwise, like with Throne of the Tides, all of the place's minor flaws aren't enough to keep it from ascending above some of the lower ranked dungeons on this list. The silver medalists for Cata dungeons is Zul'Aman. This was the other troll raid that Blizzard replaced with a dungeon as part of patch 4.1, and frankly, it fared far better. But first, a bit of background. I have a love-hate history with this place. I obviously ran it a decent amount back in the Burning Crusade on my Holy Priest. Heck, the most popular video on my channel by a massive margin is my old tutorial for Hexlord Malakras, so I have a lot of nostalgia for it. But I also remember being asked all the time to run it for attempts at the Amani Warbear, and this place was also on a 3-day lockout back then. And frankly, I didn't want to. The timer and aggressive pulling that accompanied it stressed me out, and I got tired of the place kind of quickly, so I avoided running it a lot of the time. And I wanted to slap past Zoogaloo so hard for that, because 6 or so years later, I would start actually caring about mount collecting, and the Amani Warbear is really frickin' cool. Like, it's legitimately one of the coolest mounts in the game. I kind of wish I'd remembered to put it in my top 10 list, but I probably missed it because of its unobtainable status. The thing is, I never actually did 4-chest the speedrun because I tried so hard not to have to do it. So I can't even claim that I earned it but didn't get it due to RNG. Nope, I just dropped the ball on this one, and it shall forever haunt me. But the raid/dungeon itself is pretty dang amazing. Having to bang the gong to get in was kind of neat, and I believe our first introduction to Bud and company. Then you've got this gorgeous forested environment to run around in that's leaving me seriously excited for the Zul'Aman zone that will be coming. You technically have freedom to do the first 4 bosses in any order you want, though the expedient route is to go counterclockwise from Alkyl Zone. I also love how winding and zany each of the quarters paths are. Heck, Jan'alai requires you to go past Nalarak's platform, and Halazi essentially makes you go around to the back door, passing by that scenic lake. I don't have much to say about the trash. I'm never a big fan of scouts like the one in Jan'alai's area, but they aren't a huge deal. I hated Alkyl Zone's trash because it was a gambit, but I believe they made it into normal trash. And the swarm of mobs as you run onto the bridge behind Malakras is kinda fun. The bosses are mostly quite fun as well, if a bit simple for the most part. Get under the storm player for Alkyl Zone, rotate charge targets for Nalarak, avoid firebombs and manage ads for Jan'alai, and handle the fixate for Halazi. Malakras is a great boss, though it's a shame his menagerie of ads was shrunk. I do enjoy him stealing abilities from your party's classes. He and Nefarian are maybe the only bosses that have a thing for every class, and Dakara manages to integrate all 4 Amani Loa into his encounter. Oh, and I love how the first 4 bosses all have unique models that integrate the Loa into their troll bodies, or they're just really good masks. Either way, really, I only have 2 complaints about this place. The first is that it is a bit big for a dungeon, at least by modern design. It sort of breaks the spirit of the place, but for M+ purposes, they'd probably want to split it in half, with the second half starting down by the middle pond and having you head to Halazi first. The other is simply that they replaced Zul'Jin. I mean, they allowed every other boss to survive, why not the most important one? Heck, you could say he escaped again by cutting off his other arm. Have him throw axes at us with his feet. I don't care. Just do my man some justice. But yeah, other than those two things and my warbear regret, this place is dang near perfect to me. And my very most favoriteest dungeon from Cata was Well of Eternity. So unlike Halls of Origination, which we can only speculate on, we know for a fact that Well of Eternity was originally going to be a raid before they settled on making it a dungeon. And yeah, you can tell. The assets here are miles ahead of what we got from the other two 4.3 dungeons. And like, the place is really, really good looking. It's nice seeing Night Elven buildings that aren't ruins. Seriously, there are Night Elf ruins all over the game. I think they just build them that way. But here, the Highborn architecture is on full display, a way it basically isn't in any other place in the game. And funnily enough, the color palette is warmer instead of glaring white marble. I feel like logically it would be the other way around, but I prefer this, so it's fine. There's also greenery throughout, but with the roots and other bits clearly being corrupted by the fel. Very well executed. Of course, if you look beyond the walls of the dungeon, you can see everything in shambles and on fire. Forgivable. The dungeon is very on the rails, starting out with you accompanying Illidan around the courtyard to shut down the demon portals and, as he puts it, see him save the day. After which you confront Perotharn, and hopefully manage to avoid him and his eyes during his intermission. And then make your way up Ajara's palace, and oh my gosh, the walkway is beautiful. It's see-through glass. You know how much walkable see-through glass costs? Neither do I, but it's probably a lot, and it allows you to see the rest of the dungeon around you as you fight your way up it. The Ajara encounter is basically just an ad fight with the caveat that you must keep killing the puppet strings that she uses to mind control individual players, and interrupt her to prevent a group mind control that will wipe you. It's a simple encounter, but as an Ajara simp, I like that she can't be damaged, and that she can convert you to her side. You then get some RP from the dragon aspects as they fight over control of the dragon soul, while you fly over the well itself, which just looks ridiculously cool. It's probably just the maelstrom painted green, but that would make sense given it becomes the maelstrom. I think canonically the well should be like a massive lake, but I'm fine with this representation. You then land at the edge of the well among a bit of the forest, and work with the Stormrage brothers and Tyrande, whose voice sounds noticeably different but less irritating than usual. I guess she was a lot younger back then. An AoE Doomguard pull, one big Abyssal, and two more Night Elf guards later, and we face off against Varothen and Manaroth. The fight seems to be killing Varothen while dodging fire and helping Tyrande from getting overwhelmed by ads, then switching to Manaroth for phase 2 after Varothen dies. Or you can break canon for the achievement and just focus on Manaroth. Either way, eventually Illidan turns everyone into demon hunters for you to finish matters before Malfurion pops in and messes with the portal, which causes it to suck Manaroth and all the other demons back in, with it growing unstable and set to sunder the world shortly thereafter. And hilariously, they took an endearing and sentimental "Hush, Tyrande" from Malfurion in the books and directed it to be weirdly aggressive as if he was telling her to shut the frick up. I don't know how it happened, but it's also not canon. Hilarious, but not canon. So things do get a bit extra in the last third of the dungeon, but it's the climax of the war, so it's understandable. I just find the whole dungeon gorgeous to look at and pretty fun to run through. It has Illidan being a self-centered dum-dum, and Malfurion accidentally creating a big meme. Perfection. I honestly don't have any complaints about the place. I guess if I'm super nitpicky, we have to take a taxi after Ajara, but that's like literally the only thing. And those are the Cata dungeon rankings. It was a really weird list to make just because it had such a weird mixture of dungeon types. Legitimate new dungeons, a bunch of reworks that naturally wound up being messier than the better Mop and WoD reworks, and some pretty lazy filler dungeons designed to work in conjunction with the Dragon Soul raid to burn you out on Dragonblight in record time. Fascinating. I'd say there were some real gems here, but on average, not really WoW's best offerings. I do want to apologize for the Cata Zones video and this video being so dang long. That wasn't intentional, they just wound up that way. Naturally, this week's drawing was the Well of Eternity, which incidentally gave me a very convenient excuse to draw Ajara yet again, this time around in her Night Elven form. I was very happy with how she turned out. My only failing was not really being able to do her facial markings without them looking weird. And I was extremely satisfied with how the Well of Mountain Dew turned out. And I really like the glass floor too. Yeah, I'm stroking my own ego here, I'm allowed to do that on occasion. And you may have noticed I returned to drawing spirals after that last incident. Don't worry, I have a far healthier relationship with them now. I now view them as a sign of progress and plan to utilize their spiral energy in the future. Okay, I really need to end this video. Thank you for watching and I will catch you next week. Bye bye.